am Wilma Slate, and I am the president of the Friends of the Framingham Library. We are a group of volunteers that raise money to support this wonderful library and the wonderful library downtown. The city gives the library a budget. We raise money for the extras, like this program, and like the movie licenses, and like the museum passes you can check out.
And concerts.
And the concerts. And we buy the DVDs that many of you check out. We do a number of things. We supplement the city's budget for the library. We will be in the back of the room after the program to answer any questions. And the author has graciously offered to donate 5% of the proceeds of the books that are sold today to the Friends, because she is a friend of all libraries.
And they are friends with me. Thank you, Wilma.
I'm Danielle Barney. I am the head of the McAuliffe Branch Library and a friend of Sylvia Gutmann's. Very honored. So what I'll say about this is, I guess it was about a year ago, or maybe a little more, that one of my colleagues introduced me to Sylvia. And immediately I realized what a special person she is. She is the kind of person who makes you feel great just being near her. And then she told us that she was writing a book. And we heard a little bit about her life story. And I thought, wow, when this is published, we need to have you speak here. So we let her do her book tour and go to the West Coast and go to Barnes & Noble. And now she's home here in her library. And we're so honored to have her speak. I feel like when we were introduced, it was, as we say, beschert. So,
Yes, we do. Beautifully said.
Yeah, it was, so for people who don't speak Yiddish, it is like blessed, it's fated. So it's meant to be. So Sylvia has such a wonderful story to tell. I'm not going to try to tell it. I will let her tell her story. So without further ado, Sylvia Ruth Gutmann.
So when I spoke to Danielle on the phone yesterday, she said, "Sylvia, I'm so worried." I said, "Why?" She said, "What if nobody shows up? And you can't sell any books?" I said, "Not to worry. Even if there are 6 people, I'm on. Well, as you can see, Danielle, no need to worry. You can sleep well tonight." So I want to, first of all, I want to thank you all for being here. I mean, this is huge. This is really huge.
It's a good thing I thought that.
What a group. What a group. Old friends I haven't seen in a long time, new friends, and hopefully newer friends after you leave. So it's very appropriate that I am speaking in this spot because of what Krista said about having a dream. So I had a dream. I was going to write a book. It was going to take 8 months. And then in the 9th month, I was going to find this fabulous New York agent, and they were going to bring me to Simon & Schuster, and I was going to get a huge advance, and I was going to be on TV, and I was going to be famous and rich. And that was 20 years ago. I'm neither famous or rich, although I have had a very rich life. And it is so wonderful. I wrote this book, actually, it's a love story. It's a love story to anyone who's ever felt alone and invisible, like I once did. I am living proof that you can have your dream at any age, 79, and any stage of life, and never give up. Never give up. I came to America in 1946. I was 7 years old. I came with my two older sisters. Rita was 14, Susie was 13, I was 7. I have no memory of the first 7 years of my life. Rita was my storyteller. I was taken in with my sister Rita to the home of my Uncle Sam and his wife Gertie. My Uncle Sam was the youngest brother of my mother, her favorite actually. He loved me very much, a very gentle, kind man. My Aunt Gertie, not so much. I know now, as an adult, that Gertie was overwhelmed. I realized that she was 27 years old. She had just given birth 3 months earlier to her second son. Her first son, Michael, was 4 years old. And here she is in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. Now, 2 more people are living with her, and one of them, me, is needy and traumatized. I had a lonely childhood except for Uncle Sam, who eventually adopted me. I loved him very much. My Aunt Gertie was cruel and abusive and not at all demonstrative. My sister Rita moved out when she was 17. They actually had asked her to leave because the Highest, an organization which is still available, was no longer paying for her room and board because she had gotten a job. I remember very little about that time with Rita in the house, but that's how my memories are. They kind of don't remember a lot. Maybe it was just too unbearable. So I want to read you something from the book. Bob Renee is my first friend. She is 1 year younger than me, and she shares everything with me. Her dolls, her books, her hair ribbons, her lunch, her clothes, and her mother, Elsie, who for a long time was Aunt Gertie's best friend and a kind of loving caretaker for me. Today I said to myself, I will sneak Aunt Gertie's bracelet into my school bag. She never wears it. I love the bright green stones. My aunt won't even know that it's missing. I plan to put it right back into her jewelry box as soon as I come home from school. But I forget, and she sees it on my wrist. Why are you wearing my bracelet? Gertie asks. It's not yours, I lie. I found it on the sidewalk in front of school. Gertie pulls me into the bedroom and over to the black Art Deco vanity. She opens her jewelry box and points to where the missing bracelet should be. Sylvia, you're lying. I am too afraid now to admit the truth, so I keep insisting that I found it. My Aunt Gertie has gone wild now. She's screaming and hitting me on the head and arms with a wooden cooking spoon. I hold my hands up to go and try and stop the blows from hitting me. I run from the room and toward the front door when Elsie enters. "Gertie, what are you doing? Stop this. She's only 9 years old. Don't scream and hit her all the time. Let her be a child." Every day when I come home from school, I walk into our bedroom that I share with my brother Michael. I pick up the doll that the kind social worker in Switzerland gave me and hold her in my arms. I whisper softly, "Your mommy's home." I always call her my little girl. She is about 2 feet tall with a delicate porcelain face, a small red Cupid's bow mouth, light blue glass eyes that look real, and a long black and white taffeta dress. I bathe and comb her shiny black hair, and then I smother her with hugs and kisses. One day after school, I rush into the bedroom, excited to practice my English with her, and I see that my doll is not sitting on my bed. I panic because this is where I always leave her, and so I begin to search the room. I am looking under the cover of my bed when I hear Aunt Gertie walk up behind me. "Are you looking for your dirty, old, beat-up-looking doll?" she snarls. I threw her away. "Now go change your clothes and go sweep the floor." I won't cry. Gertie doesn't like it when I cry. "Stop crying or I'll give you something to really cry about," she would threaten. On my birthday, she gives me a brand new doll. I never play with her. She is small and clean and neat, with fake blonde hair, painted pink cheeks, and eyes that are just a doll's eyes. She isn't my little girl. We have no history together. She does not need a mommy. Shame was my first emotion. Guilt was my second. Feeling worthless was my third. Hopelessness was long. I had no identity. I had no childhood to remember. They were only my sister's stories. I always wondered, was that really who I was? It never gets easier telling this story. So I'm going to bring you up to 1989. I'm living in San Diego. In the back of the book, you'll notice in my short bio, there's a paragraph that reads, "After all of these years, Sylvia's friends have learned to put her address and telephone number in pencil in their address books." It's 1989 and I'm living in San Diego, and I talk to my sister Rita every day. She lives in Cleveland, Ohio. I visit often, and now she is living in Florida. At last, after a long many years, she convinced her husband to give up his deli and to move to Florida, tired of the winters, which are horrendous. As we're talking, she seems not able to comprehend my words. As I complain about living in San Diego, I'm missing New York, the women all walk around with smiles on their faces that I think, what are they really thinking? The streets are so clean that you could eat off of them. I am feeling like an outsider and strange, and I'm kvetching and complaining to my sister. And she interrupts and tells me about an event that happened years ago, as if it were yesterday. She tells me about being in the swimming pool and her leg had cramped up, and she got really scared that she would drown, so she doesn't go swimming anymore. She tells me that she stays in the apartment with the blinds drawn and no longer plays cards with the girls. She's no longer sunbathing, her most favorite activity. And I am beginning to worry. This is not my sister Rita. She's only 57 years old. And at last she's having the kind of life that she had longed for. But she's not living well. I tell my real estate broker to sell my house. And along with my son, who is 21 years old at the time, I go to Miami, Florida. Whenever she sees me, her eyes light up like stars. Her smile is with her whole body. She opens her arms to grab me in. I am the baby. My mother's last words before she was deported, Rita, take care of the baby. Promise me you will take care of the baby. I am a 37-year-old single mother in unknown territory, desperately trying to keep it together to appear all right for the sake of my son. I am juggling 3 jobs, 7 days a week. I allow David to go see his father whenever he'd like to have him. A year later, my ex-husband abandons his son. Now I have no one to take care of my child in the summertime when there is no school. I call my sister Rita. No problem, she says in her German accented voice. But bring baby David, he's 9 years old. But she still calls him baby David. Bring him to Cleveland. I will stay a week and then leave David with his Aunt Rita for 2 months, so I can go back and work. Rita and I are sitting at the table in her big Cleveland kitchen. Just Rita and me, eating thick slices of fresh rye bread spread with sweet butter and honey. I never tire of hearing her tell me the stories about our parents and the early years of a life that I do not remember. Rita begins with this story. Let there be light. It was 1942, and we were living in one room of the house of Madame Bouhot and her 13-year-old daughter, Madeleine, in the south of France. But one early morning, 2 gendarmes, French policemen, came for us. Papa was very sick. They looked over at Papa suffering from asthma and bedridden, so they shouted, "We'll come back for you later." Papa whispered for Susie to run to the square and to ask the police prefect to help us. But when she got to the square, the Vichy police chief only shrugged his shoulders at Susie and said, "I can do nothing." The French Vichy government collaborated with the Nazis. Papa was pleading from his bed for them not to take his family as the two policemen led us out of the house. "You were crying and clinging to Mama," Rita says, "your chubby little arms wrapped around her neck as we walked to the square where the buses waited for the arrested Jews to board." Despite his illness, Papa had dragged himself down to the square. As we boarded the bus, Mama looked out and saw Papa hiding behind a tree. With her head leaning up in the direction of the family bureau, Mama silently mouthed, "Geht zurück, geht zurück, go back, go back." I don't know how long we were on that bus before we were hustled onto a train by French police in black uniforms. The windows of the train were covered with black cloth, and Mama was whispering, "Keine Luft, no air, no air." The train tracks led directly into the camp. We were hungry and tired. They handed us a thin cup of soup made with rotten tomatoes and spattered and separated us from Mama. You clung to me as we were marched into the children's barrack, where the three of us slept on lice-infested straw. Soldiers with guns stood guard outside. Many weeks later, Mama came into our barrack and woke us up. She asked Susie and me to get dressed. She helped you get dressed. You were only 3 years old. And then she told us to go outside while she left without us. The sun was coming up on a very large, open concrete square. Mama was standing with a crowd of people in a long line. We walked to another line. Our line was long too, but it was only the children. We stood outside for a long time, and I saw that Mama's pale skin was freckled and red from the sun. When they called out her name, Mama looked over at us and shouted from her place in line, "Go back to the barrack, my sweet girls. I will be back soon." You ran from the line with your arms outstretched, crying, "Mama, Mama, take me with you." Mama looked over again and told me to take care of the baby. You were only 3, and I was 10. And then the French guards who were in charge of the camp pushed her onto the waiting cattle car. I held your hand as Susie and I walked you back to the barrack. And when I turned around to get one last look at Mama, the sliding door of the train had been closed and locked. It was the last time I would ever see our Mama. Rita is crying uncontrollably now. How cruel, I think. I have not even a glimmer of memory. Not about Rita or Susie or Mama or Papa. It feels as if I wasn't even there. Rita is talking about a stranger. I only came alive on a ship to America when I was 7. Maybe I just fell from the sky. I hold my sobbing 45-year-old sister in my arms, and we weep together. I am in Miami, Florida. It is 1989. Rita is walking, but having a hard time. Her leg seems to drag. But she still dyes her hair, which is always a good sign for me. It's still bright red, and she's still wearing earrings that match her dress. Another good sign. 1 month later, my sister is walking with a walker. 3 months later, she is no longer able to walk and she is bedridden. I visit every day. 1 year later, my sister's family, her husband and her 3 children have put her in a nursing home. I go every day. And I tell Rita the stories about her happy life in Berlin. I tell her about Mama. I tell her about Papa. She no longer speaks. And 2 years later, her family puts a feeding tube, has a feeding tube installed. My beloved sister is a vegetable. She no longer remembers anything. She doesn't remember me. She doesn't remember her husband. She doesn't remember her children. But every time she sees me, she raises her arm as if she wants to touch me. And her eyes still sparkle like stars. I had begged her family, please don't do this to her. She has suffered enough. Please don't put this feeding tube in. But to no avail. 1 year later, I'm sitting with Rita in her room, and a new doctor comes into the room. Rita and I are listening to the opera. It is Papa's favorite opera, Carmen. I am singing along. Her eyes are open wide, like she remembers, maybe, the years that she went with Papa to the Berlin Opera House. I know this doctor has been sent by God. He has red hair like Rita and like my mama. And he takes a look at my sister. She is 61 years old. And he said, I will tell the family we need to remove this tube. There is no quality to her life. She will never get better. And I will promise them that she will not starve to death, and it will probably take anywhere from 4 to 10 days, and toward the end, I will just give her some morphine. Thank you, God, I say. Thank you, God. And every morning, I go to the nursing home before dawn, just so that I can be alone with my sister. And I hold her in my arms now. There's no more needles and no more tube. And I tell her how honored I felt to have been her mother when she needed me. I take her outside. I wheel her in a special wheeling cart. And I wheel her outside and I point up to the beautiful Miami blue sky. And I say, Mama, Papa, home. It's 1993. I hold her in my arms because I know she's going to be leaving. I had seen a butterfly on the windowsill next to her bed. It's September 9th. I have had to go home to take my dog out. He'd been alone all day. And at 5 o'clock in the morning, her husband called me. Rita's gone. I am devastated. I don't go to her funeral. I can't watch her being put into the ground because I know she's flown to heaven to be with Mama and Papa and our grandparents and our cousins and our aunts and uncles. I flee back to New York, my home. I rent a dark little apartment in Gramercy Square, a beautiful part of Manhattan. I send out lots of resumes. I have no money. I want a job. It's 1994, January 4th. I'm standing on the corner of 51st Street and Lexington Avenue. I am on to an interview at the St. Regis Hotel. I will be a massage therapist, and I will give facials to the men in the barbershop. It's 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm already late for my interview. And I'm standing on the corner waiting for the light to change, when suddenly I see a FedEx truck bearing down the street. And I think to myself, it was very spontaneous, that I'm tired. I'm tired of living. I have nothing to live for. My sister is gone. She was my place, my mom. And I step into the street because I want this truck to just bear over me. And I hear a voice, and it shouts, "Stop." And I run back to that dark little apartment that feels like a grave now. And I lay on the sofa and cry. I know I need help, but I have no more friends here. I've been gone too long. And I call one number that I remember, 212-980-1000. And this sweet voice of the telephone operator says, "Good morning, UJA Federation, New York. May I help you?" And I say, "I'm a Holocaust survivor. My sister's dead. My parents are dead. And I want to die." And she says, "Don't do anything rash. Don't go. Don't promise me you won't do anything harmful. And I will have somebody call you in a few minutes." 5 minutes later, the phone rings. And this lovely Spanish accented voice says to me, "My name is Dr. Milton Weinberg, and I am heading a Holocaust survivor group. And we are studying trauma. And I would like to see you in my office tomorrow morning." And I say, "Dr. Weinberg, I have no money, I have no job, I have no faith, I have no God." And he said, "I'll see you in the morning." And for the next 12 months, 4 times a week, at $5 a session, for a doctor that normally gets $250 for 55 minutes, that was paid for by the UJA Federation. Dr. Weinberg called me a hidden child. A hidden child. Nobody had ever called me that. "How can I be a hidden child?" I said. "I'm 54 years old." He said, "No, you're not. You're 3 years old. And you can come out of hiding now. You're safe." That began my liberation. Every session was filled with tears. And in the end, I felt strong and confident and worthwhile, but still, there was something missing. Rita had always talked about Germany and the happy life that she and Susie had there in Prenzlauer Berg, which is a part of the former East Berlin. She would tell me about the house where she grew up, the neighborhood, how Mama's Sabbath dinners, about the candelabra that I now own, that had once been owned by my grandmother and my mother, that it had been given to a neighbor to keep it safe until the family came back after they fled to France in 1938, where I was born in Antwerp, Belgium in 1939. I have always envied people when they tell me or they show me. In fact, a case in point, I was with my two friends eating in a restaurant, and I noticed that my friend Nora was wearing a beautiful ring that I had never seen before. And I asked her about the ring, and she said, yes, my mother gave it to me. It was her grandmother's. I have nothing like that. My son didn't have grandparents at his bar mitzvah. I did not have anyone that read me goodnight stories before I went to sleep. I have missed them all my life. But after those sessions with Dr. Weinberg, I promised myself that I now was going to talk where I had been invisible and felt worthless and felt like my story had been so terrible that nobody wanted to hear it when I came to America. No one wanted to hear about the most defining moment in my life, the moment that my mother left me in that camp when I was 3 years old. The trauma I suffered, Dr. Weinberg called it post-traumatic stress breakdown. I read you a couple of things because I just wanted to whet your appetites, but I will share with you the journey that I've been on. It has really spanned 60 years and 3 countries. In 1994, I flew to Paris, France. Of course, I had no money to make a trip like that. So, like a New Yorker, I wrote to all the newspapers. And what I said was, we hear so much about crime and rape and child abuse and domestic violence and gangsters. Don't you want to do a story about a hero? I sent it to the New York Times, to the Jewish Weekly in Long Island, and to the New York Post. I had no belief that the New York Post would do something like this, but I did love to read the gossip page. The New York Times wrote me a form letter. Lovely, but not for us. The Jewish Weekly in Long Island wrote me another form letter that said pretty much the same thing. The New York Post called me. Marcia Grains, the editor at the time, and she said, Sylvia, this is just the kind of story that our publisher, Rupert Murdoch, would love to do. And they sent me first class to Paris, France, where I was to meet my first rescuer. It is difficult to even talk and more difficult to write, but I did try to tell you what kind of emotion I was feeling in being with this 76-year-old woman who was 18 years old at the time, working for the French underground, the Red Cross, who my father had contacted and pleaded with to save his children, to promise him that she would smuggle us into France, into Switzerland. I'm holding her in my arms. I can barely speak. She's wearing a Chanel suit, a Chanel bag. We are in her office of the travel agency she owned. I am with a reporter, Avi, who had once been based for the New York Post in Paris, but now lived in Israel. He is translating everything into French, although she speaks a perfect English. And I hold her in my arms, and I am weeping uncontrollably. And she backs me away and points out to the window and says, "Look, why are you crying? The sun is shining." It is our last day together. I am there 2 days. And we have taken her out, thank you, New York Post, for a goodbye dinner. And we're sitting at the table in this wonderful French restaurant that Avi had chosen. And I'm begging her to tell me the story of Rivesaltes. How did you take us out of the camp? She said, "I do not want to talk about that. It took me 20 years to try and not have nightmares about the time that I spent rescuing children." Disappointed, but grateful and thankful. And when I come back, it has made the front page of the New York Post. She does not want her face to be shown. It is 1995, and I believe she was not willing to share that experience. Lived in a beautiful apartment in the middle of Paris on the best avenue. When I came back, I went back to work, but now I'm going to bring you up to 2008. I will read to you. And all of these things that I've been sharing with you, there are pictures in the back of the book, so you can put the picture along with the name. Chapter 50, A Voyage of the Heart. As I wait for my friend Jean, in whose apartment I now stay until I find a place of my own in New York, I open my computer and check my emails. When I open the one from my friend Connie, my German friend, there is no text. All I see on the screen is a dark, grainy photograph of a group of children. In the first row sit one boy and 4 young girls. In the second row stand 4 girls and 2 tall boys. In the last row, wearing berets, stand 4 boys, 2 girls, and a young woman whose face is only partially visible under her white nurse's cap. Why has Connie sent me this picture? I quickly emailed to ask her. I get no immediate response, and I am so anxious to know, but then I look at my watch and realize that in Germany it is 3 in the morning. The next day, after a sleep-deprived night, as soon as Jean leaves, I look at my emails. The photo was taken in Camp Revisult, Connie writes. I copied it from Liesl Hanau's memoir. She is the 18-year-old nurse in the picture. She is 83 years old now, and she lives in Jerusalem. Who is Liesl Hanau? I stare at the screen at this ensemble of children in the French internment camp, where 2,250 foreign-born Jews, including 210 children and my mother, had been interned and deported to Auschwitz. Rita, it's you, I shout. It is my 10-year-old sister in the second row. I continue searching through the faces. The photo is quite grainy. But now I see the half-hidden face of my 9-year-old sister in the last row. One little girl in the first row has short, dark hair. Her legs are bare. Her bangs skim the top of her eyebrows. And she wears a jacket, or maybe it's a short coat. She looks to be the youngest child in the group. It's hard to make out her features, so I lean very close to the screen. Even in this grainy, 65-year-old, black and white photograph, her eyes are too vacant for a 3-year-old. Oh my God, it's me. It's me. The 3-year-old self I had left behind in the camp. I have only 2 photographs of myself as a child. One is the photo I had sent to Madeline in 1999, where Papa is holding me up when I am 2. And the other was taken after being smuggled into Switzerland with my sisters when I was 4. That's the picture. My sister only remembered Mademoiselle Rothschild. The only memory that Rita could share with me about our time in the camp was when I broke from the line and shouted for Mama to take me. At the end of the story, Rita always shrugged. It was the last time I would see Mama. Even when she smiled and radiated happiness, I saw that sad, sad moment in Rita's eyes. Throughout all the years that I spent in Rita's Cleveland kitchen, her with a chunk of German salami and in one hand, and the other with a freshly baked seeded rye bread in the other, she never told me about a nurse named Liesl Hanau. When I asked her, why did we not go with Mama, she'd answer, maybe on the day that Mama left us, the Vichy police had told the parents they could leave their children behind. Whenever I shared my story, I found it impossible to believe. Everything in me tells me that the Vichy police had never shown that kind of kindness. Now I will finally learn the truth. I write Connie. Connie, I must go to Israel. Maybe Liesl will remember my Mama. Maybe she will remember me. Today, I will meet Liesl Hanau. the nurse who saved me. I am told that she is very excited to meet one of the children left in her care. It's a windy April day in 2008 when I enter the lobby of the senior home in Jerusalem. It's on the third floor to the left of the elevator, the last door next to the window at the end of the hallway, the receptionist tells me. I knock on the door, but there's no answer. So I knock again. No one comes. So I try turning the doorknob, and when I open the door, I see a small, gray-haired woman in a red sweater sitting in an armchair. She gets up and walks to the door, shouting, "Sylvie? Sylvie?" My throat closes as I try to speak, so I just nod yes, and I bury my face in her outstretched arms. My tears burst forth like a dam. They wet her glasses. My now crushing embrace has set off her old hearing aid, and it's beeping loudly in the ear. But I am unable to release her. I want to crawl into her skin. How old is this child? Liesl asks. 69, I answer. Yes, I thought so. It is hard for me to wrap my head around this moment. I am really in Israel, in the small, neat apartment of the woman that I saw in that old grainy photograph. It feels otherworldly, like I'm in a movie. Come, little one, she says, holding my hand. She tells me to sit with her at the kitchen table and hands me a paper towel to dry my face. I was 18 in 1942, and I had just completed my nursing studies, Liesl begins. I was working in a Jewish nursing home in Strasbourg when I received an urgent call from Andre Solomon, the director of the Save the Children organization. Take the train tonight and join me in Camp Riverwald. You will be the official nurse of the children's barrack. Camp Riverwald is a vast encampment of wooden barracks spread out over 3 kilometers of an open, stony plain, not far from the Mediterranean. I do not see a blade of glass anywhere in the camp, she says. It had been a military camp 30 years earlier, but now it was being used to house the Central European Jews, mostly women and children. People live with total lack of hygiene. The toilets are merely wooden planks, outside, without doors or walls. They sleep on lice-infested straw or straw-covered planks with just a rag for covering. In the barracks, there are no tables or chairs and no water in which to bathe or wash the children. The camp is surrounded by barbed wire with a direct railroad connection, making Camp Riverwald the perfect place for the French Vichy government to imprison all those foreign-born Jews. Old people are dying of typhus and starvation. Babies are born but die soon after. Their mothers have no milk. The children are covered with lice. They get only milk coffee with no bread in the morning and rotten tomato soup for lunch with nothing more to eat until the following day. Rita never skipped over the soup when she'd tell me the sad story of Rivesaltes. I still do not eat tomato soup. It is the last day that I'm there. Come, come, Sylvie, we must first eat. Liesel begins her story again. From early morning on, the interned, a collection of men and women and children, stand outside of their barracks. I had gone to the barrack the night before, and I told all the women, leave your children behind. I will take care of them, and before you come back. None came back. That is how I got saved in Camp Rivesaltes. Don't take them with you, I beg. Push them into my waiting arms. The parents are not even allowed a short hug with their children before I take them back to the barrack. Then I return to the roll call until the end of the day. They are tragic moments, but also ones of strength. The goal is clear to the parents as it is to me. Save the children. So many parents refused to separate themselves from their little ones, but today the children's barrack is full. Hope is on our side. We must act quickly. I have always hankered for a link to a past, for my family, destroyed connections, and a trace of the buried in my childhood that I cannot remember. This photograph is an unbelievable gift, I whisper to Liesel. Liesel has taken me back to the day my mother left me. Waves of grief cross my face. It's hard to catch my breath. This is the story of that day in Rivesaltes. I close my eyes to try and picture my mama, the way Rita has always told me she looked. Mama with her red hair, her porcelain skin, and her fine bones was not only a fashion plate in the best of times when it was easy, but more importantly, she was a fashion plate in the absolutely worst and most horrible time. The 3 years after I was born. How horribly wrong, I think, that all the running, all the planning, all the begging for a night to stay, or a year, or a week, to be allowed to live, none of it saved our parents in the end. Not until this moment, in 2008 with Liesel Hanau, do I feel my mother's ultimate gift of life. Mama had made a heart-wrenching choice. She gave me life again. But maybe Mama was not the only one to make a decision that day. In this solemn moment, I understand that subconsciously I had also made a silent promise to my mother that I would never be fully happy. It would be disloyal to Mama's sacrifice if I lived too well, became too rich or successful, and lived with abundance. I know that it was completely irrational of me to have thought that the promise I made would have changed anything. Living with the guilt that I had been spared, I spent half of my life with the belief that I had not earned this life. Forgive me, Mama. Forgive me, I silently cried. Upon my arrival in America at age 7, I had lost my parents, my name, my language, my home, and my childhood. I grew up surrounded by a conspiracy of silence that said, put all that behind you. You have to erase from your memory everything that ever happened to you. You have to move on, hide your pain. I was forced to give up my history and my past and told to keep my feelings and my sadness to myself. My visit has nearly come to an end, when suddenly I receive in my silenced memory the echo of the child I had been in the camp, as I did in Nye, when I had a memory of the fountain in the park where I had played with my papa. Here with Liesel, I now feel a sense of a tiny piece of chocolate in the palm of my hand. I asked Liesel if this means anything. Yes, she answered. When the children became separated from their parents, they would scream in terror and despair. When I take them back to the barracks, as a way of offering comfort to the children who were left in my care, I place a tiny piece of chocolate in the palm of their hands. That's where my story ends. One of my favorite passages, reflecting the agony and the ecstasy of my life's journey, is from The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. In the story, two nursery toys, the skin horse and the rabbit, talk about becoming real. Does it hurt? Asked the rabbit. Sometimes, said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. When you are real, you don't really mind being hurt. Does it happen all at once, like being wound up, he asked, or bit by bit? It doesn't happen all at once, said the skin horse. You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't often happen to people who break or have sharp edges or have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off and your eyes drop out and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand. So I'm real. I am real. I am who I look. I am who I say.
My goodness.
I'm proud that I never gave up on this story. I felt obligated. I wanted people to know my parents. I wanted people to know my past. I wanted people to know me. It's a beautiful book. It'll make you cry, but it'll make you laugh. So, now that I've got you in captive audience, I want you to make some comments or ask questions or say anything. You're safe here, you're with friends, we're all...
You did mention your sister, your sister.
I've done it again. Well, it kind of speaks about our former relationship. The question was that I didn't speak about my third sister, Susie, who is very much alive. She just celebrated her 85th birthday. She lives in an assisted living place in Miami, Florida. She is a great-grandma now, and she's fat and happy. Always do the fat part, because she was always thin. We didn't really have much of a relationship growing up because I never lived under the same roof with my sister Susie. Nobody ever wanted three of us, and she had a hard life. She was pushed around. She went to an uncle and an aunt until they gave her away, and she ended up living with Rita and her husband Jack, and then got remarried. She had a young child, and she did get divorced after many years, 30 years. And we talk now. We talk a lot, really. And she ends every conversation with, "I love you. I love you." So that's my sister Susie.
What about your son? You want some-
My son was just 50 years old. I tell him to lie, actually. He lives in Texas, poor dear. Yeah, he does. He's a junior accountant, and we've had some rough going. But although he will always be my baby, my only child, my baby David, he has a family. He's not married, but he has brought up this young girl, her child, and it's amazing how patient he has become, how loving and kind. Well, he's always been loving and kind and very demonstrative. And I think it's a mutual saving life story between he and this little girl who he loves very much.
Thank you for your powerful testimony. But my question is a philosophical one, because it took so much striving on your part. I'd like you to speak about what remembrance means.
What does remembrance mean? Well, for me, interestingly enough, I'm sure that you have heard many survivor stories. Probably in 10 years, there won't be many survivors left. And certainly, and I've often heard survivors end their talk with "never again." I never say that, because it's happened again and again and again. May I remind you, of course, of Rwanda and Bosnia and Africa. And remembrance is up to the young. Remembrance, of course, to me, it's the people that should be forgetting that remember, and it's all the survivors. So often I've heard people say, enough with the survivor stories, enough with the Holocaust. It is 2018, and the rise of anti-Semitism and racist is far more, not only in Europe, but here. I read something in the New York Times today that I want to share with you. Vote the change that you want to see. Be the change that you want to see. Young people are the less of the entire group that vote. This cannot be, because nothing will change until you vote. Remembrance is not that it can't happen again. Maybe not at that grand scale, because more than 6 million perished for the simple reason that they were Jews, and 5 million perished because they were either resistance or perpetrators or non-Jews. Remembrance is sacred for me. I think that's why I think that's one of the reasons I wrote this book, is because I felt it's like a legacy. It's like I'm leaving something behind. And it's a gift. It's a gift for me, it's a gift for the people that will read this. It's about loving life. I mean, I so love my life. Even when it's poorly wrapped, it is a gift. It is a gift. And nobody has to do anything to deserve to live. No one. It's your right. Give back. Be kind. That's remembrance. You can save a life if you smile at a stranger. You don't need a gun. Libraries, teachers. I'm sorry there aren't more young people here, because I would tell the story of my teacher, Mrs. Lynch. I'm 8 years old, I'm speaking English. I love the language, and I love to hear myself talk. And I'm standing in front of my class, my new American friends. And I'm holding up the dress that I wore on the ship to America. And I begin to share my story. And I say, this is the dress I wore on the ship that brought me to America. And once I had a real mommy and a real daddy, but they were killed. And all of a sudden, I feel this hand on my arm. I had the handprint for a week. And it's Mrs. Lynch, blue-haired Mrs. Lynch. And she swings me around and points her finger in my face. And she said, "You little liar, go sit down." That moment, I never shared my story again until I was 55 years old. The impression that a teacher can make on a child can either be, you're worthless, you're a liar, your story is a lie, or you're a worthwhile little girl. And we are here to love you and to make you feel worthwhile. Instead, school was hard for me. I always felt like an outsider, like the other. I grew up, food was my only comfort. I was obese. And I had no identity. One comment. So, more questions, more comments, please.
And thank you for sharing your story. I read your book, Tears, Laughter. But one of the big differences for me is that most of the all of the survivor stories I'd heard till now in your book were adults, and yours was the first child survivor story, and that was so different than the adult survivor story, because they had their, I realized they had their identity. They knew who they were. And you didn't have that chance. So I thank you for sharing.
Thank you, thank you. Pretty much to sum up, reading my book, which she has, is more from the point of view of a child. And it's far more about the aftermath. We didn't come here and live happily ever after. So my happily ever after happened 55 years later. So it is the point of a viewpoint of a child, and it was hard to write this book. It was very hard to write this book because I had to remember things that happened 70 years ago.
How did you end up in Framingham?
I ended up in Framingham because they had a beautiful apartment in the Shulman House, where I now live. But who knows where I'll be next year?
Oh, you've been here for 7 years already. Were you brought up in New York? Did you go
Yes, I was brought up in New York, in Washington Heights. Then when I moved out, I went to the Greenwich Village. My son was born in the village. Then I went to the Upper East Side. Then I went to Berlin, Germany.
You said something before about you now own the family's candelabra.
I
How
do.
did you get it?
My sister had bequeathed it to her daughter, and Ilana sent it to me last year. It's beautiful.
I bet.
It's beautiful. I do light Shabbos candles every Friday evening. My sister always did that, and I do that now. But I don't use the candelabra. It's too beautiful.
What are you going to be doing with the candelabra? Will you pass it on to you?
I'm going to donate it to the Holocaust Museum.
Good, good.
Yeah. I haven't decided whether it will be the museum in Berlin, Germany. I do have German citizenship. I lived there for 6 years, and I was given honorary German citizenship because I spoke about my life to senior groups, to neo-Nazis, that was quite an experience, but we don't have time for that.
How do you react to Holocaust deniers?
I'm here, and Hitler's not.
I was curious, with the candelabra, how did it stay in your family?
Yeah, that was one that I was going to ask you.
My sister Rita and her husband had taken a trip back to Berlin. I think it was 1974. And she actually met the person. I think it was not a neighbor. I think it was a relative of Papa's. And she brought it back. She brought it back to America. And I now have it.
I was interested in hearing about your return to Germany. Could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. The question was my going to Berlin, Germany. And it was not a return because I'd never been there. I was born in Antwerp. My parents were German. Mama was born in Fürth, which is a small village right next to Nuremberg, and my father was born in Leipzig. Their parents were Polish. They were also murdered. I won't tell you the juicy part, but just to say that in 2000 and 2001, I was on a Holocaust, what would you call it? A Holocaust retreat. Not a Holocaust retreat. That sounds like a spa. It was called the March of Remembrance and Hope. And what it did was take 200 university students and 200 university students from Europe, and we would go and visit the Poland and visit all the camps. I'm in Auschwitz. I'm standing on a makeshift stage, and I'm talking about my parents. And I look out at this crowd of denominational, yeah, tongue twister, a group of students and their professors from all over. And I say, this ground is sacred ground. It is filled with blood and bones. It is here where my parents perished. I'm standing in front of the crematorium 4, the half-bombed crematorium, the only one that was left. I'm looking out at the camp, which is in perfect condition. It could be started again. We have just traveled the ovens. We've looked at the crematorium. And I'm looking out at this crowd of students, and I see the Germans like this. Yeah, rolling their eyes. More Holocaust stuff. And at the end, when they all leave, I'm standing on the stage all alone with my grief. And a young man comes toward me. And he said, I wanted to take a picture of you, but I can't because I'm crying too hard. And I go back to America after a week in Poland in the camps. And I get a phone call, and he calls me every day. He's a young Czech student, 22 years old. I am 62. And he begs me to come back. He'd like me to talk in the German school where he studies. On 2001, on September 11th, I am standing in the airport in Berlin. I have no luggage, it hasn't come. He helps me fill out the lost luggage form. We drive to the small apartment that I had rented from his friend. And when we arrive, she's home. And she's looking at the television. And she just nods hello. And I see a film on the screen. And I'm looking at the Twin Towers, and I hear a German man, who I think is dubbing a Bruce Willis film or a Superman film. And I'm watching this plane going into the Twin Towers, and I'm waiting for the hero to come and save the day. And suddenly, Yannick, my young friend, screams, "Oh my God!" And he translates the newscaster's German for me, And the Twin Towers have been torn down. I want to go home. I need to go back to New York. I want to help. I want to rescue people. But the airports are closed, no flights. So I stay. And 2 weeks later, the airports open, and I don't go. I stay. And I feel as if this is an omen from God, that I am supposed to be here because I am supposed to do something. And I asked Yannick to write a German letter that I will say in English. And the letter says that I am a child survivor of the Holocaust. My murdered beloved parents from Berlin. And I am here and I want to speak in the schools. And we send it out to 50 schools that we find in the telephone book. High schools, universities, and in the letter I add that they must speak English. And I get a first letter. It's in beautiful English from the superintendent of the school. And one morning in 2003, I am standing before 100 young people, 17, 18 years old. They're sitting in a circle. I had requested that they all be seated in a circle, and I would stand in the middle in front of them. And I walk into the room. It's very early in the morning. And I am led into the room by the history teacher who has teamed up 2 different classes, because it's rare for a Holocaust survivor to speak in Germany. They didn't go back. And I look at these people, these young people, and there is such a tension in the air that I want to run out of this room. I have never spoken to a German in my life. I hate the language. When I'd hear it in America, not even the survivors. I lived with 2 survivors, and not even with their friends who were also German survivors did they ever speak their home language. I want to run out of the room. My heart is beating so loud, I'm afraid it's going to bust out of my chest. I'm so afraid. I'm afraid that somebody's going to say, "You dirty Jew." And I walk around the room and I take all their hands and I say, "Thank you for coming." And suddenly the air lifts and the room becomes light. And I begin to share my story. And I tell them, "I hate you. You are the children of perpetrators. And they killed my family. 42 members. They murdered my people. Just because we were Jews. Their only crime." And I tell my story as I told it to you today. And suddenly there is a quiet in the room. You can hear a pin drop. And I'm so afraid that I've said something to make them angry. And they're going to scream at me. And they're going to shout dirty names. And they're going to tell me, "Get out of here. We're tired of this Holocaust stuff." And suddenly I hear 100 chairs sliding back. And they stand up. And for 5 minutes, they give me a standing ovation. And of course, I did the most adult thing. I just wept. And I opened my arms and they came running into my arms. Thank you, they said. Thank you for sharing with us. You're so brave. You're so strong. We love you. We'll never forget your family. We'll put more love in the world, as you asked us to. And that was the beginning of a 6-year journey. And I've done that pretty much up until 3 years ago when I really had to finish my book. I went every year and I spoke in those schools. Yes.
Not a question. I feel you're very courageous. Thank you.
It's a privilege. It's a privilege. I thank you. I thank you. You came with open minds and open hearts. I thank you for coming here today. You could be doing so much more else, not more.
Thank you so much for being here and for hearing this. Thank you, Sylvia, for writing this story that when I read it, I felt like it was a survivor's story. It's not just a Holocaust survival story, and you're right, it is for anybody who has felt invisible, and it's inspirational because this woman is a phoenix. When you read it, she rises from the ashes again and again and again
And again.
and again, and it's wonderful. So thank you, Sylvia.